What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Chill, where I, Graham Gius and Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network and on Peacock. And today we're talking the Jeff Jarrett episode of Broken Skull Sessions back from June 3rd, 2022. Went up a day after my birthday 3 months ago, and we're slowly but surely catching up on the Broken Skull Session shows. I just broke down the Bubba Ray Dudley one about a week and a half ago, Cody Rhodes a few days ago, so check those out if you haven't already. And now we arrive at Jeff Jarrett. The timing of this one was perfect at the time because he had just gotten his new job at WWE. Now, I don't know what the exact timeline is, but I know he returned initially back in 2018. I think he got a job as a road agent, I believe, 3 years ago in 2019. And then COVID happened. I don't know if he was still with WWE during that period or if he got laid off, fired, released, left on his own. I don't know. I know he was doing his podcast stuff. And then it came out a couple of months ago, actually, even just as recently as this summer, that he had been appointed to like the senior vice president or like the head of live events or something like that. And then it comes out like a couple of weeks ago that he's no longer in that role and has since been replaced by his buddy Road Dogg. So Road Dogg's back in the company in that role. Jeff Jarrett is apparently full on gone from WWE. Don't know if it was their choice, his choice, mixture of both, not sure. So it was interesting because they don't talk about his new role here on the episode. I assume this was filmed before he was either promoted or brought back or whatever. And then it dropped around then, like literally like the week of the news breaking. And now he's gone from WWE again. So as of this recording, he's currently not in WWE, but maybe he's back at some point in the next 6 months, who knows. But this was a great conversation, though, no pun intended with the whole anti-great catchphrase from Jarrett. But they start off the show with Jeff and Steve talking about their perceived heat from years ago, fans thinking there was heat between them. There wasn't. Jeff was actually on Steve Austin's podcast, which I probably listened to at the time because I love Steve's podcast up until he stopped doing original episodes. But he was on the Broken Skull, Steve Austin Unleashed show, whatever it was on podcast 1 year ago. So that probably should have told you they didn't have any heat from many years ago. But he remembers first seeing Steve when he first broke into the business. Jerry Jarrett, Jeff's dad, was actually the first promoter Steve ever worked for. And he tells this story that is common knowledge by now, that he used to get paid. He was under an agreement with Jerry that he would get $100 a night in the USWA. At one point, Jerry broke that agreement, and Steve Austin went up to him, asked him about it, and Jerry told him, hey, it's just the territory's down right now, whatever. I think it was actually before that point, before he talked to Jerry, Jeff saw Steve looking at his paycheck, his receipt, whatever, and Jeff told him it's not going to get any bigger by looking at it. So I think that's where people thought by Jeff saying that to Steve that there would be heat between the two and that Steve had some ill will towards Jeff for saying that, even though he was joking. It was all in good faith, whatever. So anyway, like I said, he went up to Jerry after that, asking him why his paycheck he wasn't honoring the agreement. And Jerry said the territory was down, and I apologize. And I think Jerry thought that Steve was leaving, and Steve clarified to him, no, I'm not leaving. I'll keep working for you, but I just need to know that it's probably going to go back to that at some point. Jerry said, sounds good. And I guess it did, maybe, who knows. But they talk some more USWA. Jeff talks about how I think his grandmother sold wrestling tickets, like tickets to wrestling shows for money as a job at one point. His father ended up marrying Eddie Marlin's daughter, so wrestling kind of ran in the family. Despite that, there was no pressure for him to enter the business. He recalls falling in love with the idea of wrestling, of wanting to wrestle at one certain point at an early age. He also played football in high school. He played basketball. Before he went to college, he actually refereed and served as a wrestling referee, rather. Tongue twister for me to say. But he served as a wrestling referee, and he was really lucky to have those reps. He talks about being on the road at a young age, being consumed by the business at that point. They rewatch a 1991 USWA match that they had against each other, Jeff versus Steve. And they talking about working and enjoyed working in that studio environment. And it was around 1993 that Vince told Jerry, hey, I want your son Jeff in WWF, but as a heel. And I think Jerry might have had his, reservations about that because Jeff at that point, I think, was a babyface in USWA. Jeff was all over it. He was elated, and he was really excited for that opportunity to work as a heel. They rewatch his debut in WWF, and he talks about how he didn't have as much confidence back then. It's pretty evident watching it back now. He got paired with Road Dogg Jesse James soon after, as his roadie, obviously, which is where the Road name comes from, obviously. And he had to be built up with wins and matches and stuff like that. Vince wanted Jeff to be a singing cowboy. And he talks about the whole process and recording With My Baby Tonight, their hit single, that was actually sang by the song, whatever, by Road Dogg. But the whole gimmick was that Jeff took credit for it. And listening to it now, he says it and I'm thinking it, that you can hear Brian, you can hear Road Dogg, but it's like back then no one really put two and two together because you never really heard Road Dogg speak or sing or whatever. So it was a funny case where no one really knew that back then, but listening to it now, it's like, obviously that's Road Dogg. It's pretty fucking obvious because all we hear him do is talk as a character and podcast on TV, whatever. So anyway, Vince told him, listen, you got a great heel act. All you need to do is back it up in the ring. They rewatch his In Your House 2 match with Shawn Michaels for the Intercontinental Championship in the summer of 95. So the timeline here was a little weird. He injured his back soon after. And the match with Shawn, they kind of talk about it as if that was his final match. I don't know if the Jesse James stuff, that big reveal, came out on that show. I did a lot of research while watching this episode of Broken Skull Sessions because I'm not very well versed on Jeff Jarrett's career and the Attitude Era aspects of his career and whatever. So he made it sound like he lost the title to Shawn. The split from Jesse James happened that night, and then he was gone from WWE later that year. The records that I looked at showed him having matches as late as January of 96. So he said he was gone from WWF in October of 95 or October of 96. He went to WCW in October of 96, which would make sense if his contract expired. He can go there immediately. Maybe I misinterpreted that and he meant October of 96. I'm not sure. I don't know when the split would have happened. I mean, that's obviously on public record, but he was with the company through early 96, losing to Ahmed Johnson on the way out. I think losing to him by DQ at the Rumble in 96. So anyway, the point of the matter is that he left after his contract expired, and the landscape had just changed in WWF at that point. He didn't see eye to eye with Vince, so he went to WCW in October of 96. Did this whole storyline with Flair where they had great chemistry. He joined the Four Horsemen, or what that stable was at that point of the Four Horsemen. There was some internal drama with the NWO as far as where the Four Horsemen were being positioned on the show, opposite of the NWO. He didn't like the corporate environment of WCW. In WWE, it was pretty obvious who was the boss, that being Vince. He did not think he could succeed in the environment of WCW under that leadership at that time. So it was a blessing in disguise, he says, that he signed a one-year deal when he came in 96 because he went right to WWE. As soon as his contract expired, he left in October of 97. He was on Nitro one week. The very next week, he was on Monday Night Raw. Honestly, either I didn't know that or completely forgot about that. No one really talks about that, and that was even before X-Pac came over or came back in early 98. So Jeff Jarrett was one of the first people to kind of jump ship back to WWE. But anyway, they rewatch his Raw 1997 shoot promo where he went off on Eric Bischoff, he went off on Vince McMahon. Vince, I guess, behind the scenes, wanted to capitalize on the fact that Jeff was going from Nitro to Raw in a week, and they were smart to do that. The early ideas of him being like this shoot version of himself didn't work. They tried to do a few other things, didn't work. They recreated the Double J Cowboy character, manager and all, also did not work. So he was kind of floundering for a while up until he lost the hair versus hair match to X-Pac at SummerSlam 98. That allowed him to kind of reinvent himself. So he found instant chemistry with Owen Hart as a partner. They worked really well together. They were very close outside of the ring. Sadly, they have to recall the night of Owen's death at Over the Edge, 1999, in the role that Jeff played in all of that, and seeing him that day and right before he went out, because I think they were supposed to do either a singles match or a tag match or whatever it was. But Jeff kind of retells the whole, without shockingly getting too emotional here. It's obviously a very tough topic to talk about. And he recalls the role that he had that night and where he was and hearing about it and just crazy shit. He thought Owen sprained his knee because he didn't see it happen. He had no idea what the fuck was going on. He did the match, went backstage, saw a police officer, said, "Hey, can you bring me there?" He said, "Yeah," grabbed his bag, went to the car, immediately went to the hospital. While he was in the back of the car, he tried to get answers from the cop, and the cop told him, "Listen, it's not good." And it was pretty bad. Obviously, he passed away. And what was worse was that he and everyone else went back to work soon after. Like, did not take much time off at all. And as far as processing all of that, he mentions it didn't really come out until he was in rehab 19 years later. The Don't Piss Me Off character was probably his biggest success at that point in WWE. It really fit in, he says, with the Attitude Era. He rewatches his promo with the Fabulous Moolah, where he hit her over the head with a guitar shot. And Moolah told him to really lay that guitar shot in, a la, who am I thinking of? Mae Young with the table spot with Bully Ray, or Bubba Ray around that point. He also praises Chyna and all the other tough women WWE had back then, really not only setting the stage for the women to come in WWE, but also the men, making them look great and looking great themselves. And they played a really important role in WWE's product at that point. And he enjoyed the storyline with her. He thought he would get a big bump in pay because it was going to be this hot storyline. Heading into No Mercy, they were a good housekeeping match. But as more time went on, he realized that big payday was not coming. And he knew he was producing despite not being main event material. But again, he talked to his family, kind of looked at things, and knew that big bump in pay he was hoping for, that he thought he was worth, was not coming. And in retrospect, he recognizes and realizes that bad communication was not good, was what cost him his job there at that point, and he would do things differently in retrospect. Just not a great way to go out. They rewatched the Good Housekeeping match from No Mercy 1999 with Chyna, and he thought he left on good terms. He embraced Vince afterward, backstage, shook the hand of Pat Patterson and Bruce Pritchard. I heard a very different side of the story, and other people talking about this and how bad the blow-up was with Jeff, kind of demanding money essentially from Vince, a la Warrior from years earlier. He doesn't talk about the exact money numbers here, or holding up Vince for money because his contract expired the night before. So he doesn't talk about all of that. He kind of either glosses over it or that didn't actually happen. I'm not sure. Not really for me to get into right here, right now. But he mentions that Vince left him a voicemail on his phone 2 days earlier, and he kind of took some blame for himself. He put some of the blame on Jeff. He even put a lot of the blame on Jim Ross for not figuring this out earlier, for either not realizing the contract was coming up or not paying Jeff or whatever it might have been. Jeff felt he was red hot at that point and wanted to capitalize on that by immediately going to WCW. And it was there that he did the whole Slapnuts persona. They show the guitar shot backstage on, I forgot the gentleman's name, but they also show the guitar shot on the smaller fellow, was the first one. The second one was Gary Coleman. And not this smaller fellow, but the other smaller fellow they showed right before this getting the guitar shot. Forgot his name, but Gary Coleman they show getting the guitar shot, who stuffed his hat with toilet paper, thinking it was going to ease the blow, kind of lessen the blow, which it didn't. And he really swung for the fences, he said on that one, did Jeff, because he was pissed that Gary Coleman's hat fell off and the toilet paper was exposed, and he put the fucking toilet paper back in his hat. Completely stupid. They rewatch his first WCW World Heavyweight Championship win at Spring Stampede, rather. Easy for me to speak today, I guess. In a match with Diamond Dallas Page. They also rewatched the finger poke, not the finger poke of doom, but that awful, I think the finger poke of doom was the Nash and Hogan stuff. The other incident here with Russo, the screw job at Bash at the Beach 2000 against Hogan, and he's very guilty that he played a part in that. He was involved in that in any way. It's a black eye in the business, the company, everyone involved. And he just kind of tells the story that Hogan was willing to put him over, he thinks, but because Hogan didn't know what was going to come next, courtesy of Vince Russo didn't tell him what was next. He had no idea what was going to come next for Hogan. Hogan then changed his mind and said, I'm not putting him over. I'm not losing the match. So that turned into the whole screw job, whatever. He talks his part in all of that. From there, they rewatch Vince mentioning Jeff by name the night that WWE announced they were buying WCW on Raw, and Vince spelling out gone. And Jeff, seeing that, thought it was an angle originally, just being the wrestler that he is, thought it was an angle. Obviously, it was not. And he didn't really think that there was any bad blood there because it had been years since they last interacted. So why would Vince have any bad blood with Jarrett? And the answer is he's fucking petty. That's why. So from there, he saw a void in the marketplace of there not being a real number two in wrestling. And that was when he started TNA, total nonstop action wrestling. And he talks the ascent of the company moving upwards with time slots from being on Saturdays to these random time slots, then prime time on Thursdays on Spike TV. And he was really proud of that. He takes a lot of pride in that. Unfortunately, as far as his downfall of TNA is concerned, he lost a lot of confidence in executive leadership. And he didn't like where TNA was headed, and he would have changed his expectations because the biggest issue, he says, was that he wanted TNA to be an alternative to WWE, whereas the Carters, Janice and Dixie Carter, wanted TNA to be a viable number two, which is why they brought in Bischoff and all these other people, wasting a lot of big money on people that didn't really make much of a difference long term, as far as positive impact anyway. which was probably the beginning of the end for Impact, although they're still around now killing it, just not at the level they were at previously. Anyway, so Jarrett wanted to focus on the stars of tomorrow, the AJ Styleses, the Samoa Joes, the Bobby Roodes, people like that. And Jarrett wanted it really to be TNA. Like, he was more of a TNA guy, and they wanted it to be Impact. And that's where he thought the disagreement kind of happened. So that's interesting that Jarrett wanted it. Probably if Jarrett was still in charge of TNA, it would still be TNA today. I think the changing of the initials was dire. Like, I agree with Jarrett as far as focusing on the stars of tomorrow, the people like AJ and Joe and Rude and people like that. But moving away from the TNA name, which was a fucking they were dumb initials for TNA in the first place for that company, Impact was just far better. The branding of it I agree with, as far as I agree that they went in that direction. Changing the whole idea and perception of the company and going backward, which is what the Carters were doing, I do not agree with, and I agree with Jeff that was pretty dumb. Anyway, so he launched Global Force Wrestling, GFW, in 2014, went back to Impact in 2015, and then again in 2017, went back in 2015 for the Hall of Fame for a storyline, and that was it. Assumed a leadership role, an executive role in 2017 when Anthem bought Impact, and the Carters were gone. And he talks about his drinking problem and cites genetics for that, and kind of saying that it's a lot like heart disease. Some people can stay out the sun for a little longer than others, and the ones that can't get kind of skin cancer out of it, stuff like that. So I don't know if that's a valid comparison or not, but he cites his addiction on genetics and stuff like that, and some people are more predisposed to addiction than others. But anyway, he fell off a cliff, and it was only getting progressively worse. He fell off a cliff in 2017, got sober, he says, on October 25th, 2017, so we're coming up on the 5-year anniversary next month of that. Congrats to him for that. Road Dogg was there the entire time for him, he says. He was in rehab for 56 days. Got the WWE Hall of Fame call days upon getting out of the rehab facility on the first Sunday, he says, of 2018. Recalls reuniting with Vince at the Hall of Fame for the first time in person since 1999. And he's at more peace now with everything, including the Owen Hart stuff and everything else that's occurred over the course of his career. He's grateful for every opportunity he's gotten. He takes pride in highlighting his opponents and making them look better. And he also talks about the podcast process with Conrad, doing the podcast with him and never really having much interest in the whole podcast thing early on, but then it kind of grew on him, and he loves sharing stories, and it allows him to look back on his career and do that whole retrospective thing. And he also talks a lot more about that in our cheap plug interview from about a year ago here on the channel. Went up in article form on What Culture and in video form here on the channel if you didn't check it out. So check out my chat with Jeff Jarrett and check out this episode of Broken Skull Sessions right now on Peacock. I thoroughly enjoyed this. The hour and 45 minutes, not including commercials, just flies by. They had great chemistry. It was really very interesting to hear a lot more about Jarrett's career than what I knew previously, which really wasn't a whole lot. I knew the bare bones of it, just the basics of his career. And I got to know a lot more about him as a person and his career from listening to this episode. So I may have learned more than you did. You probably know more about Jarrett's career than I do at this current point. But just as a conversation between two old friends, I thought it was great stuff. So definitely check it out right now on Peacock. They talk a lot about his WCW run, USWA days, WWF, WWE, Impact, GFW, TNA, and everything else in between. So great stuff here. Strongly recommend it. My next Broken Skull Sessions review will be covering the Sami Zayn episode from July. Looking forward to that one. That looked like a ton of fun. And then Charlotte Flair, I think, was August. So I have those two to watch and review, and those should be coming fairly soon here to the channel. Thank you guys for checking out the review. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and be sure to subscribe as well for more daily content. More content going up right now on the channel every day, more than ever, with almost 2 videos a day. And that's because I'm slowly catching up on posting old interviews and doing reviews like this. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and never miss a new video as they drop pretty much daily. Have an awesome one, guys. I'm Graham G. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.